Coming up on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, it's time to trade away everyone. Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. It is all ridiculous at this point. Getting blown out by the Orlando Magic, 30 points. That's an embarrassment. You should fire Taylor Jenkins, get rid of the entire team. It's time to blow it up. April Fools. Who cares if they lost? It doesn't matter. We're going to talk about that, the bigs coming up in the NBA draft and more. Stick around here on Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You guys should have seen your faces. Oh, Joe's going off the deep end. I got you guys good. You can act like I didn't get you, make you think here comes a hot take. But we all know. We know. I got you. It's okay. Good way to start your April Fool's Day here on Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host for this episode, Joe Mullinax, flying solo. No to Michael Cole, enjoying some time with his family over the Easter holiday. Happy Easter to you and yours. If you celebrate, hopefully you enjoyed yourself. You had a good weekend regardless. Watched a lot of good basketball. Definitely not Grizzlies Magic. That unfortunately is not an April Fool's joke. That was bad. But pull a prank on somebody. A nice, kind-hearted prank, right? Somebody that you love and you know can appreciate a good laugh, like hopefully you did to start off your episode on Monday here of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure that you are subscribing, liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, wherever you get podcasts on YouTube, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, whatever the case might be. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day, almost every day. Michael and I took off this past Friday. And to be honest with you, can I be honest with you for a second? I regret nothing, right? Like it is tough watching this Memphis Grizzlies basketball team right now. And I know that I get paid the big bucks here, right? Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode of the show. You're here for analysis. I get that. And I'm going to jump in here and tell you that sometimes analysis doesn't mean squat. Sometimes it doesn't matter because when your starting five features three guys that may be in the rotation next year, one for sure that will be, another one that you would imagine would be in Gigi Jackson, and then Luke Kennard coming off of a lengthy absence due to the birth of his child. Congratulations to Luke. And your bench features Brandon Clark, who looked awesome, by the way. That is a positive, a thing to be excited about for Memphis against Orlando. But outside of that, there ain't much to talk about, folks. And that's the reality of where these Memphis Grizzlies are right now. That is what you are looking for content on. That is what I am tasked with providing said content for. A Grizzlies team that features four at most full-time rotation pieces next season. If you're excited about Scottie Pippen Jr., maybe you want to make an argument for him. I think he's on this roster next year. I don't think he's a full-time rotation member. I know folks like Lamar Stevens. Lamar Stevens hasn't shown much since he came back from injury. DeMichael and I have talked about wanting to see him play the three. Is he a small ball four? Is he a guy that in switchable defending groups, can he be a five? If he can't play the three, he can't play in Memphis. And right now, it doesn't look great for him in that spot. It just doesn't. So that's not to excuse the likes of Jaren Jackson Jr., who had a pitiful game. 4 points on 9 shots in 26 minutes played, 4 rebounds. 3 turnovers, only 1 assist. Not a good showing for Jaren Jackson Jr. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. But again, dear listener, dear viewer, can you blame him? Can you blame him? Because even if you want to say that Luke Kennard and Gigi Jackson and Brandon Clark are rotation members next year, that may be true. But 4 guys does not an NBA roster make. And Jake LaRavia, who has had some better performances, probably not a rotation guy on this team next year. We already mentioned Scottie Pippen. Already mentioned Lamar Stevens. There are so many players. The Grizzlies played Xavier Simpson, who I believe made their 31st roster move of the year, 31st player actually logging minutes for the Grizzlies. That sets the record for the most players ever to log minutes for an NBA team in any one season. If you are a longtime Grizzlies person like me, and you can remember the 2015-2016 Memphis Grizzlies, the Hateful Eight version of the Memphis Grizzlies, they're on that list still. Because of COVID, they're a little bit further down the list. But the remarkable thing is, and what makes the season so much worse than that 2015-2016 season, even worse than having to cheer for Matt Barnes, what makes it worse is that at least that team made the playoffs. They started really well, struggled towards the end, and they still limped into the playoffs. You still had a postseason to look forward to have hope for. Obviously, it didn't end well for Memphis at all. But they competed and they fought, and it was fun to see them have that postseason experience where they were soundly eliminated and moved along from. That is not the case here. You know the season is about to end. The Grizzlies are roughly 8 games away from going to Cancun or wherever their vacation is going to be for the first time in the Ja Morant, Taylor Jenkins, Zach Kleiman era. This team is not making the playoffs. Not making the postseason is the better way to put it. Because even back when Ja's rookie year in the bubble, they made the play-in for the first time. And then they made the other play-in tournament, won that, and then obviously the 2 seasons of the 2 seed. So in year 5 of this is the first time that they haven't made the playoffs. And they deserve some grace because of all that's transpired. But at the same time, that doesn't make it worse or any better, compared to what we had to watch against the Magic. And the Magic are a good basketball team, right? That's part of the April Fool's joke and all this as well. The Magic are a top 5 team in the East right now. Could maybe win a first-round series, maybe make a little bit of noise depending on their matchups in the semifinals. They're young, but they defend extremely well. And they provide issues in terms of their size and length that even when Memphis is healthy, those problems are intriguing. Like, say Desmond Bane and Ja Morant are out on the floor, and they have to go against the size of the Magic front court and back court, the switchability of Orlando, the way that they can defend multiple positions, the versatility. There's problems that could be presented. Now, the Grizzlies wouldn't have to worry about that until an NBA Finals matchup, and if both Orlando and Memphis are making the NBA Finals, who cares, right? Celebrations all around. But the Magic are a good basketball team, and they're going to continue to get better because of their inexperience. The only thing that'll probably hold them back, or the main thing that'll hold them back outside of matchup, is their inexperience. So no disrespect to Orlando, because they did what they should do to a bad Grizzlies team. But even though Memphis is in a really bad spot right now, that doesn't change the fact that Jaren Jackson Jr. could have shown a little bit more. Again, I come back to Brandon Clark. Brandon Clark has missed a lot of basketball. Brandon Clark anxious to go out there and show that he can still do the things that he is capable of doing. And it was a lot of fun to watch him do just that against the Magic. The flashes of that athleticism, that leap ability, the opportunity to really be explosive at times and show what he can do with the ball in his hands, not just as a versatile defender. Brandon Clark is maximizing those minutes. And in fairness to Jaren, Jaren's been out there almost the entire season. He's been the good soldier, putting in the work, playing his tail off most nights. A bad night's going to happen. But as we've talked about here on Locked On Grizzlies before, you just don't want to get embarrassed, right? And to the credit of the Grizzlies, they've been losing games, but not getting destroyed, not getting outright embarrassed. Like the Magic, this was worse at times than the final score actually indicated. And in order for embarrassment to be avoided, the Grizzlies need somebody like Jaren Jackson Jr. to continue to compete and put out his best effort on a night in, night out basis. That's just the reality. And if you don't care about that, I understand completely, right? Like Keith Parrish and Sean Coleman, former host of Locked On Grizzlies, Sean Coleman, they did a Grits and Grinds podcast, and they didn't even talk about a recent game. I think it was the game against the Lakers that I got mad about Rui Hachimura, and that's not a knock on them. I understand completely. But we all want to move on from this season. All of us do. I'm sure the players more than anybody else. But you got to finish it first. And hopefully we see that, win or lose, we see that energy in a better place starting tonight against Detroit. And, you know, if there's a team that maybe wants to lose even more than Memphis, in this tanking palooza that's occurring as the season concludes, it's the Pistons. We'll talk about that more next, coming up on Locked On Grizzlies. But coming up, I don't know if you watched the NCAA tournament over the weekend, but it was a good weekend for bigs. Obviously, the Final Four is set. We'll talk about some options that Memphis could go with if they do go the fee-fi fo-fum route. We've already talked about several of the names. We're just kind of reinforcing their fit and how good they looked over the weekend. That's coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks. March is over, but the biggest moments in college basketball tip off in the month of April. Be part of the action on Prize Picks for both men's and women's college basketball. Get in on the action. Win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks. It's going to be a lot of fun. As little as 4 correct picks turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, but as well as hockey, college basketball, all sorts of entries today on America's #1 fantasy sports app. Again, it's a blast over at Prize Picks. Make sure you're checking it out. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Go check them out today. We come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, talking a big opportunity that Memphis has in the NBA draft. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this episode of the show. No DeMichael Cole. I miss him. I'm sure you miss him as well. He'll be back soon, potentially as soon as our Tuesday edition of the show. But again, Memphis plays the Pistons in Detroit tonight, so we'll see how his game coverage for the commercial appeal goes. It might just be me solo once more. But either way, there will be an episode each and every day this week of Locked On Grizzlies. I know we left you hanging a little bit on Friday, but all 5 days this week, you're going to be getting a Locked On Grizzlies show. Yeah, the Grizzlies lost to the Magic, and yeah, they're playing another really bad team in the Pistons tonight that we'll talk more about here in a little bit. But you're probably more excited about the end of the season, NBA draft preparations, those sorts of things. And I get it. I truly do. I'm excited about it too. But as Memphis' season ends in the next couple of weeks, DeMichael Cole and I are going to be hurting for content. You know what I'm saying? So we're trying to be patient with those breakdowns, going in depth with prospects, that sort of thing. However, obviously the NCAA tournament is currently going on. The Final Four is set. Alabama plays UConn on Saturday this coming week. And then you've got NC State. NC State, the Cinderella of Cinderellas, a team that shouldn't be in the tournament if UVA can make free throws, going back to the ACC semifinals. NC State taking on Purdue. Now, if you are a fan, and I'm paraphrasing the great wrestler Big E as we approach WrestleMania, paraphrasing him, if you are a fan of big, meaty men slapping meat, no need to pause. Look it up. It's a thing. If you're a fan of that, this Final Four is going to be for you because there are going to be 3 players in particular that I think are worth keeping an eye on going into the Final Four. And we'll talk more about this later on in the week. But I want to highlight their performance this past weekend as reason, and we talked about this a little bit on the Thursday show. I don't understand when you look at this Grizzlies roster and you see the glaring need for another big man, right? Because right now, who's your third big? Santi Aldama? That's not helping anybody, right? If this team is serious about contention, they need a big, a true big. And there are 2 guys that are currently on a collision course, it would seem, because as fun as the Alabama story has been, as amazing as the NC State Cinderella run has been, Purdue and UConn look like the unstoppable force meeting the immovable object coming up here, right? And the 2 major forces, UConn's deeper than this. But the guy that impacted that game against Illinois that got UConn to this point so much, Donovan Clingan, taking on a center for Purdue at 7'4" that had a 40-point, 16 or so rebound game himself in the Elite Eight, and Zach Edey against Tennessee. Sorry for all the Volunteers fans out there. That might be one of the reasons that DeMichael's not with me. He's mourning Tennessee losing. But Zach Edey and Donovan Clingan, that looks like the head-to-head that's coming in the national championship more likely than not. And those two guys are the two that I have my sights set on the most if you are looking for a true big. Now, Kyle Filipowski, who lost to NC State in the Elite Eight of Duke, that's another one that if you want to talk about him, his screen setting, his ability to shoot the three, I'm cool. That's fine. He'd be a Kelly Olynyk type that maybe would fit Memphis relatively well. But again, fee, fi, fo, fum. Filipowski has guard skills. He does things on the perimeter. And maybe that's your cup of tea. But Donovan Clingan and Zach Edey are the two that really check that big bill. My preference is Clingan. All right, and here's why. Because he can move a little bit better on the perimeter. I'm not super excited about the idea of him in isolation if he gets switched off on against a guard or an athletic wing. I'm not going to pretend I am. But if you want a fee, fi, fo, fum, like Victor Wembanyama is not a fee, fi, fo, fum. Victor Wembanyama is not a true giant. He's tall, he's long, but he's like a super version of Jaren Jackson Jr. in the fact that he's got guard skills. Now, he can rebound, do all those things. I get that. He plays the center position. I understand. But he's not your traditional center. If we're talking about traditional centers, Clingan can move a little bit better than Edey. I think Zach Edey has the experience advantage. I think that he has been the best player in college basketball the last couple of years, and he's had a target on his back fairly consistently, and that prepares you for a level of competition that obviously is not necessarily going to translate to like a G League Ignite kind of situation if Memphis were to go that route. Both of these guys are battle-tested. Obviously, Clingan playing for UConn the best team of the last couple of years in college basketball. So those are the two guys that I'm most excited about. And I want to stress, Clingan, if it's 7 or 8 that Memphis is selecting, and according to Tankathon, they're right in the mix right there for the number 7 pick. That's probably where they're going to land. If they are picking around 6 or 8, and Donovan Clingan's on the board, I don't think it's crazy to take the guy there. I really don't. And maybe you can let me know in the comments why I'm wrong. But if you watched him play against Illinois, that 30-0 run, Illinois is one of the best teams in the country offensively. One of the best statistically throughout the entire course of the regular season and into the tournament. And UConn embarrassed that team, destroyed them, bludgeoned them. And the major reason why was Donovan Clingan. He was dominant. I would take Clingan at 7 happily with bells on because the Grizzlies need a big and Clingan checks that box. I would not take Zach Edey there. I think Edey has more flaws than Clingan. I think Edey makes sense late lottery into the later first round. If Memphis were to trade back, that's when I would be interested in him. I think he's a first-round talent. I think people saying he's going to drop to the second round. Why? Because he can't shoot a three? There are aspects of the NBA that are a little bit bigger than that, right? The fact of his size, his rim protection. He provides a lot of offensive rebounding and rebounding in general. Purdue is one of the best teams rebounding in the country. Why? Because they have a 7'4" guy that can do it for them, 300-pounder. Big, solid frame. So those are my two guys. Again, I wouldn't necessarily take both of them in the lottery. I definitely would take Clingan there. And then, because I'm sure people are going to want to talk about Zebo 2.0 and DJ Burns out of NC State. That guy, if you thought the Kenneth Lofton Jr. discourse was bad, imagine that dude showing up in Memphis and playing for the hustle and cooking dudes. Because that's what's going to happen. Burns is going to be a heck of a G League dude. And there ain't nothing wrong with that. You want him on the Memphis hustle and you want to be realistic about what he's going to be in the NBA? We can talk about that. Not anti that. Just because he's 6'9", 275 pounds, don't compare him to Zach Randolph. They have similar games, but in terms of one being really freaking good and the other one being talented but playing in an entirely different era of basketball, would Zebo still be today what he was 10 years ago? I think that's a fair question to ask. 12 years ago. So Burns almost came out in the wrong. He's a throwback. He's a heck of a lot of fun to watch play, and he's extremely important to NC State. Again, second-round pick, 2-way contract? Yeah, we can have that conversation perhaps. But the two that I'm keeping my eye on are Edey and Klingon. Klingon in the lottery, Edey if Memphis trades back. It's going to be fun to watch those two potentially face off with a championship on the line. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will preview kind of Grizzlies-Pistons as best I can, given the current state of play for both squads. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, if you're watching Fox Sports, ESPN on TV, and you're tired of having to turn down the volume because of all the shouting, you need to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. It is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs as well as the Fire TV stick. You can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and television episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. They've recently curated Fire TV channels that deliver a constant supply of the latest videos for your favorite sports plans, all for free. That includes us here at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep you up to date on the latest in the world of sports. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out the episode, talking about Grizzlies-Pistons as best we can. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, once again flying solo. No to Michael Cole. Potentially back for Locked On Grizzlies on Tuesday, but it might be me flying solo again. We'll see how his post-Pistons schedule works out. And we've talked on this episode about the pain of the Orlando Magic loss. Maybe I care a lot more than you do, and let me know in the comments by all means. Maybe you're just like, Joe, stop talking about how losses sting. We want them to lose. That's true, but again, I don't want them to lose in an embarrassing fashion. The Magic are a good basketball team, but it hurt to see that. It hurt to watch that at times. I know, again, tanking makes sense at this stage, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment, but it doesn't make it any easier when you're watching the team do it, even if it makes it easier for them to draft a Donovan Klingon or someone of that ilk later on down the road in the lotto. The NBA draft lottery, I should say. Speaking of the lottery, the Detroit Pistons are currently sitting at the top of the NBA draft lottery. And if you haven't checked out how the odds work for this, you definitely should over at tankathon.com. I have it bookmarked at this point. You certainly should as well. Memphis currently slated to pick 7th. But the odds are that they are most likely to pick 8th, 34.1%. They have roughly an 8% opportunity to jump up into the top 10 or so, depending on the pick, right? Depending on where they fit. The Pistons are in a much better spot. You know, if you're number 1, you don't fall past 5, right? And that is obviously something that holds tremendous value for Detroit. They are the worst team in the NBA by record. That could fluctuate here or there, could still potentially change, but Detroit is very much in that mix. Point being, Memphis doesn't really want to win, and Detroit doesn't really want to win. It's a battle of the losers, so to speak. And Memphis's injury report kind of backs that up. You know, Santi Aldama, I believe, is questionable to play in this game due to illness. We'll see if he actually logs some minutes. John Conchard dealing with plantar fascia issues, probably not going to play. Desmond Bane remains out. I would imagine you're not going to see Derrick Rose, Zaire Williams, Marcus Smart. I think DeMichael wrote an article about that over the weekend. I'm probably not going to see a lot of those guys the remainder of the year. Wanabe's still out. You'll see Jaren Jackson Jr., who likely will want to have a bounce-back performance from how poorly he played against the Magic. And I think that you're going to see a better outing from Brandon Clark as he gets more comfortable, which is really optimistic because it's not like Brandon has been bad, right? Like Brandon has done some good things. For Detroit, guys like Cade Cunningham, questionable due to left knee injury management, probably out. You've got Simone Fatecchio, he's out. There are so many players that are not active, like Isaiah Stewart. That is someone who, continues to have issues in and out of the lineup. Thompson, their good rookie, probably going to miss the rest of the season due to a blood clot, or he will miss the rest of the season. So again, the Pistons are in a similar spot to the Grizzlies. What does that mean in terms of how Memphis wins this game? You could argue that Memphis is going to have the best player on the floor in Jaren Jackson Jr., and that obviously should mean something. If the Grizzlies are able to go out there and take on a Pistons team that's down a Cade Cunningham, and they've got a former All-Star in Jaren, the Pistons shouldn't be able to hang with that, at least theoretically speaking. And that is something to be optimistic about if you want the Grizzlies to win. But in their most recent contest, Detroit was able to knock off the Washington Wizards. Again, another team that's pretty low on the totem pole at this stage in terms of wanting to win. And one of the ways that they did it, aside from Cunningham launching 33 shots, if he is indeed active, somebody that every once in a while you'll hear Memphis and Memphians talk about loving to see if he could wind up in Memphis somehow. And that's Jalen Duren. He was a monster, 20 points, 17 rebounds. He's been one of the bright spots for Detroit in an otherwise lost season. And Duren is going to, if Jaren is starting at the 5, going to be Jackson's assignment. And that is going to be the key to this game. Whether you want Memphis to win or not, we're going to approach it from the perspective of we're a podcast for a team that is trying to win basketball games. Jaren Jackson Jr. has got to win that matchup. And Jalen Duren has had tremendous effort and energy and is showing signs of making leaps and growth that the Pistons could potentially build around entering into a pretty important draft pick for them and determining what direction they go. If it's top 5, which it likely will be for the Pistons, who they select. That matters a heck of a lot. And I look forward to watching that contest that individual contest, because Jaren, he has pride as a player. He has made growth in his own right. He's done a lot of good things as a creator of offense for others. We talked about his assist percentage a lot on here, still a career high. We've talked about his isolation scoring, how Jaren is finally being that guy that a lot of folks have wanted to see in terms of give me the ball and get out of the way. Jaren is able to create for himself and for his teammates at a higher clip than he's ever been able to do. That's wonderful. He has to take the younger, less experienced Duren in that area each and every time. He has to be dominant. And to be honest with you, this is a game that if Brandon Clark continues to come off the bench, it should be a good opportunity for him, using his experience and his athleticism, to take advantage of a weaker Detroit Pistons team in that regard. So the Magic are really good, right? Probably a top 10 team in the NBA this season, maybe a little bit less than that. But they're still a good basketball team. The Pistons are on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. They are arguably the worst team in the NBA. They lost a lot of games in a row to start out the season, if you remember correctly. So while this is a battle of two squads that are pretty bad, at least right now, the Grizzlies have a habit of winning, right? And they will be playing guys like a Luke Kennard, like a Jaren Jackson Jr., like a Brandon Clark, who have been a part of that winning in the past. They are playing guys like G.G. Jackson, who need to continue to get experience, not just winning, but playing winning basketball. It can't be G.G. launching 30 shots and people talking about these numbers that he's putting up. It has to be him creating offense, not just for himself, but off dribble penetration, making kickouts and passes to cutters, guys slashing to the rim. You want to see that development from G.G. Jackson. You want to see growth and continued growth, because he's obviously grown and gotten better a lot this season. So it's not just Memphis winning, because the Grizzlies probably should win this game, assuming Jaren's going to play and Brandon Clark, Luke Kennard, those sorts of names. In theory, this should be a Grizzlies win. But it's not so much about winning as much as it is how they play. Because, again, they may lose. Memphis is 1 game away from Toronto for that 6th spot in the lottery. And you can't tell me that's not something that front office is interested in. The coaches and the players are going to compete. Some of those players are literally playing for their NBA lives. But the coaching staff and the players are continuing to compete. The front office is probably saying, Desmond's back looks like it hurts a little bit. Let's give him a break. right? And while there are similar desires to let the season end on a low note in terms of wins and losses from both front offices, I'd imagine, because of lottery odds, the coaches and the players want to win. Jaren Jackson Jr. is the best, most experienced player on the floor. The Grizzlies should win this game as long as they go through him and as long as Jaren is more engaged than he was in Orlando the last time Memphis was out. So fingers crossed that even if it's a loss, a competitive game with a good showing, that is my goal, and it should be yours as well at this stage. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 streaming channel over on YouTube, also a part of the channels section of Amazon Fire TV. Very excited about that. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe, all those fun things on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get podcasts. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day, and all of them are good with us. We'll talk Grizzlies-Pistons the next time we're together. We'll take a look a little bit to Marc Gasol's documentary that came out over the weekend. I'll give my thoughts on that, an early kind of discussion of Marc's place as he gets his number retired in Memphis this coming weekend. All that and more on upcoming episodes of Locked On Grizzlies, starting with our Tuesday show. Again, thank you so much for being here with me. I am Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. Enjoy Grizzlies-Pistons as much as you can. Avoid all things that might confuse you on April Fool's Day. We'll catch you next time.